So when Joe asked me to do this, he did not tell me I'd be going after a Hall of Fame speaker who had tequila. I am not a professional speaker, so as a result, this is a limited edition. You're probably the only audience that will ever see this. So as Joe mentioned, my name is Lexi. I go by Lexi. I launched a content business last year. Our brand is called They Got Acquired, and we help entrepreneurs sell their business. My big goal with this brand is to help us all reframe how we think about entrepreneurial success. You do not have to sell your business for hundreds of thousands of dollars to be a success. If you hold on to a profitable business for years, that is a huge win. And if you decide to sell your business and you sell for $5 million or $1 million or even $300,000, those are also wins, especially if you bootstrap the business. But what I learned when I went through the experience of selling 2 content businesses was there weren't that many resources out there for people like me and like you guys who wanted to sell their business and didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to find the information, like the basic information about how to sell. I didn't know how to find trusted professionals to help me, and that's the pain point that we're solving at They Got Acquired. We're helping entrepreneurs reap the rewards of what you've built. This is my 4th time building a content business. As Joe mentioned, years ago I had a content agency. I also helped build a personal finance media brand called The Penny Hoarder, and I built and sold a website for writers called The Right Life. But when I started They Got Acquired, it had been a long time since I started a brand from scratch, and I really forgot just how many pieces are involved in that. I was a little overwhelmed at the beginning. So I came up with a framework that I'm going to share with you that helped me stay organized on top of everything and also really helped me prioritize things. So here's what it looked like. I think of building a business in 4 buckets. You have content, which is our product, right? You have people, that's the team that helps you build the company. You've got your audience, who are your users or your customers or the people that you serve. And you have monetization, or how you're gonna make money from the business. Now, here's a little bit about what that looked like for us at They Got Acquired. Under content, we have a newsletter. We put that out twice a week. We publish several blog posts each week, and we also have a podcast. Under people, we're bootstrapped. We're a small team, so we have a contractor model to start with, and most of those contractors are content people, so they're reporters, editors. We have a producer and a designer. We also have some operation support. And then in the early days, I also thought of workflow tools in that bucket because we had to figure out what tools we were going to use to do our work and how we were going to use them to collaborate. Then we've got our audience, and at They Got Acquired, for us, our North Star in terms of audience is email subscribers. That's the #1 thing that we care about. And we focus on growing that audience through search, social, and a little bit of paid. And then finally, monetization. Like most media brands, we're aiming for a diversified revenue streams. We have sponsors for our newsletter and our podcast. We also put out reports, and some of them are paid reports, so they're case studies of businesses that have sold. So for example, you want to sell a media business, we have a report on media companies that have sold, so you can see how other people did it. We also make referrals for founders that need help finding someone to help them sell, like an M&A advisor. If we make a referral that results in a successful relationship, we get a commission. And then we're also rolling out trainings and memberships this year. So we're just pushing live a short course on how to sell your business, and we're planning on a membership later this year. So what you see right here, I have some version of this on the whiteboard in my home office at all times. And I like that I can see a high-level overview of what's required to build this business. But even more than that, I use it to help myself prioritize. So I'm often writing on it and saying, okay, here's what I'm working on this week or this month. And it helps me think about where I should put my focus. And that's what I want to show you next. So here's how I spent my time ahead of our launch. Each of the colors represents one of the buckets we just talked about. Content is orange, people is dark blue, audience is light blue, and monetize is green. In the months leading up to our launch, I spent at least half of my time building our email list. And my goal was to hit 1,000 email subscribers before we launched the brand. We just barely hit that, and it helped us have a kickstart going out of the gate so that when we put our content live, there was someone there to read it. I also spent a good amount of time on content in those early months trying to figure out, what is our voice? What does the content even look like? What's the format? What's our style and our brand? And then I spent some time recruiting mostly writers, freelance writers, to write for us. And I also put some energy during those pre-launch months into monetizing the brand. And at that time, it was really simple. I just wanted to have some sponsors for our launch. There was one trap that I was trying really hard not to fall into during that time, and I'll show you what that looked like. I really didn't want to spend all my time on the content, and I think there's a good reason why a lot of us fall into this trap. We want the product to be really good, and we want people to have a reason to come back to us again and again. We want to be helpful. But if you spend all your time on the content, you're not doing the other things that are really required to make a sustainable business. So here's what my first year ended up looking like. I did end up spending a lot of time on content, and honestly, I could have easily been at that 80%, because even though I had hired writers to write a lot of the content, which helped me kind of avoid this trap of spending all my time there, I still had to edit it all. I had to assign it. I was drafting a lot of our newsletters. I was working on the podcast. But I kept myself to this 40% so that I had plenty of time to work on the other pieces of the business that I knew were going to help us make it sustainable. This next graph represents how I solved a challenge that I came up against in the first year. And that was that there were times when I felt like I really needed to put more of my energy into one of the buckets, but because we're a small team, it's just me and a small group of contractors, I can't go above that 100%, right? There's not more than 100% of me. I had to take out of another bucket to put into the bucket that needed focus time. So for the first 2 months of this year, this is how I did it. I said to myself, all right, I am going to actively, intentionally ignore audience growth for 2 whole months so I can focus on generating our revenue and getting some of our monetization rolling. We had an opportunity with some of our sponsors who wanted to sponsor our reports, so I wanted to get those out quickly so that we could get that rolling. But it meant ignoring a really important part of the business, and that was hard for me to do. I did it intentionally, and that meant that during those 2 months, our audience growth really slowed, and then I came back to it later. But because of that, I was able to move the business forward in ways that were really meaningful. And here's what my time looks like now that we're in year 2. I hired a part-time managing editor who does a lot of our content now, and that's allowed me to focus a lot more of my energy into the monetization. So here's where that approach got us after 1 year. I put this infographic together, or some version of this, for myself and my team at the 1 year mark, because I find it's really easy, like when you're in the day-to-day, to feel like you're not making enough traction. And so there's got to be some milestones where you can say, all right, I started at 0, and look, I actually did something. We achieved something this year. That number in the middle is, like I said, it's our North Star. That's our email subscribers. And right below that, you'll see our revenue for year 1. That's becoming more of our North Star this year because we're focusing more on that now. Now, I want to go back to this one for a moment because I kind of chuckled to myself when I created this, thinking like, it's not totally representative of my whole life, right? This 100% here is my work time and my work energy. But we are all way more than that. We all have lives outside of work. We want to take care of ourselves. We want to socialize. We have families. Some of us are taking care of other people. So there were so many times where I really didn't have that 100% to give. I might have had 80% or 50% or even 20%. And those are the moments when I started to feel like angsty and worried or overwhelmed that there's all these things I want to do in my framework, on my whiteboard, and I'm not going to get to them all. So here's a couple of things that help me stay grounded during those times when I'm trying to juggle all the things, whether it's just work or it's work in your life. The first is you can't build Rome in a day, and this is something my husband says to me about once a week, so I should probably give him credit for it. But the way I like to think of this is I've got to align my expectations with my actual resources. And too often I fall into this trap where I'm expecting myself and my team to have the same output as a team that I ran a few years ago where we had 60 full-time employees. Of course that's not the case, right? So how do I align my expectations with the actual resources that I have every day to do our job? The second one is let small bad things happen so you can do the big things. This is a Tim Ferriss idea that has really become my mantra over the last decade. I love it because it gives me permission to drop certain things so I can focus on other things that are actually going to move the business forward. And we saw an example of this when we talked about the first 2 months of this year. When I ignored audience growth, I let a bad thing happen so that I could focus on revenue, which is going to move the business forward and honestly make it sustainable for the long run. Another good example of this, I think, for content people is our content's never perfect, right? And it's hard to push content live when it's not perfect. But what's the saying? It's like published is better than perfect, right? You got to let something bad, a small bad thing happen. You got to push that content live when it's not exactly where you want it to be, so that it can be live and out there in the world and start to do its job and helping the people that are looking for it. And finally, be intentional. The whole point of having a framework for all of us is to help us be intentional about where we spend our time and our energy. Sometimes I look at that whiteboard and I remind myself that my success does not rely on me doing all the things all at once. Instead, my success really relies on how well I prioritize. And I think that probably applies to all of you, whether you have a team of one or you're running a big company, whether you're funded or bootstrapped, whether you are hoping to hold on to your business or maybe you want to sell it in the next few years. For all of us, your success relies on how well you prioritize. I hope you'll join us at theygotakquired.com/newsletter. And if you're into content operations and you want some more ideas there, I write about that at alexisgrant.com.